you. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by way of the Council's internet site. The images and sound recordings may also be used for training purposes within the Council. As you'll see from the agenda papers, generally the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you're consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or any other training purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangements prior to the meeting. Would members please use their microphones to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphone when you've finished. Members dialing in remotely, please turn on your camera for the duration of the committee as requested by the Planning Department. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using any mobile devices during the committee and that any devices are on silent? Thank you. We have a number of apologies this morning. It's Councillor Howells, Cox and Councillor Horton. Do we have any declarations of interest with this morning's meeting? No. Could we have a look at the minutes of the previous meeting from pages 3 to 6? And any matters arising? Yep. We'll move on. We'll say if these, is it a true representation of the minutes of this meeting? Yeah, Chair. Seconder? Okay. Councillor Rheoli, second. Okay. Right, thank you. Moving on. Item number 1. The application number is 25/1074 and the site is 4 Nantamore Close, Cynllunio, Newport. The ward is in Tredegar Park, Marshfield. The presenting officer is Adam Foote. And we have one public speaker, Mr. Rafiq Tufail, who's the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. This application comprises of householder development and is being reported to the Planning Committee at the request of the local member. The application site is a detached 2-storey property located at the end of a purpose-built residential development and shares a private driveway with the adjoining property number 5 Nantamore Close. The application seeks consent for a number of alterations to the dwelling house, including a garage conversion, single-storey side and rear extensions, loft conversion and dormer, the reprofiling of the rear garden and the construction of an outbuilding for ancillary purposes to the existing residential dwelling. A point of note in the assessment of this application is the permitted development rights that are attached to the property, and in relation to the proposed developments, the only restriction relates to the conversion of the existing garage. So with regards to the construction of extensions, alterations to the roof and the erection of outbuildings within the site, permitted development rights are in place on the basis that they would accord with the requirements of the General Permitted Development Order. Now, this application has been revised since its original submission, and a number of amendments have been made. We've received a number of objections from the public consultation, raising a number of issues that I'll come on to follow in due course. The proposed, the plan as shown gives an indication of the existing site layout. So you have a generous garden area, an existing attached garage, patio, conservatory extension to the side elevation of the property, and the now shown plan gives the proposed view. So you have your converted garage, the addition of a side and rear single-storey extension. The garden is proposed to be reprofiled. I'll show a section in due course, but the reprofiling is to create a more level area, but does not increase the overall height of the rear garden area. And then you'll note the addition of a outbuilding within the rear portion of the garden for workshop, hobby room and gym. The section here shows the reprofiled garden, creating two level areas opposed to the existing sort of more gradual slope, and shows the position of the enlarged extension to the side elevation and the position and scale of the outbuilding. The plan currently shown is the rear elevation and shows the proposed dormer within the roof plane, the single-storey flat roof extension, and the proposed replacement single-storey side extension. On plan, you currently will note the replacement of the garage door with a centrally placed window and the repositioning of the entrance door. And you'll note the addition of the single-storey rear extension and the dormer. Again, just shows the position of the proposed single-storey side extension. And again, just the proposed design of the additions and alterations to the property. The hobby room is proposed as ancillary to the existing residential dwelling and is so no additional use is proposed on site or to be introduced. You'll note from when I come on to some photographs that the neighbouring property has a outbuilding within a similar position. Here we just have the existing ground and first floor plans, then the proposed ground and first floors, and then the proposed loft plans showing the layout and roof plan. So this is just an image taken from Google Street View. This was a better image than we were able to achieve on site due to position of parked cars, but it just shows where the property is. So it's tucked away behind the neighbouring property, set back from the road, so it's not very visually prominent. You'll note the existing arrangement with the garage doors and the position of the existing entrance. This is the rear elevation, so on the left-hand photo, so this is where the single-storey flat roof extension would be positioned, and the existing, it's labelled on the plans as a conservatory, but the existing side elevation shows the existing side extension, which would be replaced with a larger structure, and a box dormer is proposed on that rear roof plane. So you'll note that there's quite a generous garden, both to the rear and to the side of the dwelling. So there is quite a large plot, quite a lot of room, and you'll note the gentle slope of the site. If you note the photograph on the right-hand side that shows the position of a outbuilding in the neighbouring property's rear garden. So, with regards to the extensions, they're considered to be of an appropriate scale and design. There is a condition suggested for the property to be, or for the developments to be completed with materials to match the existing dwelling, just to ensure that there is visual cohesion. With regards to the garage conversion, there's no concern with regards to the visual impact of the conversion of the garage and the replacement of a centrally positioned window. Of course, there will be a loss to the garage. However, the property would still be served by sufficient space on the driveway, and the local highways authority have been consulted on this application and raised no objection to conversion of the garage. However, we do recommend a condition for the existing driveway spaces to be maintained or retained for the parking of private vehicles. The single-story extensions are considered to be acceptable in terms of their scale and design, as is the rear dormer, which I'll just bring up on plan, which you'll note is set down from the ridge of the roof and set in from the extremes of the roof plane. There is a condition suggested as part of this assessment for the windows within the rear elevation to be obscurely glazed as to protect the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. The garden reprofiling, again, it doesn't increase the overall garden level, it just creates two distinct level areas with access from one to the other. This in itself is, we are considering this as an engineering operation requiring planning consent, so that's why this element is explicitly included. And again, the rear, the erection of the outbuilding for purposes ancillary to the existing dwelling is considered to be acceptable, and we have no issue in terms of the scale or design of the of that outbuilding. Again, the outbuilding is proposed at the extreme of the garden, away from the closest residential properties, and we don't anticipate any issue in terms of the use of this building or the any impact in terms of overlooking or any overshadowing given the limited scale and design. It is noted that in the latest consultation, Welsh Water have raised some concern. Now, the applicants may need a build-over agreement due to the presence of some of the Welsh Water apparatus within the area. However, as previously noted, permitted development rights are in place for outbuildings and extensions to the dwelling. Therefore, we do not consider this to be an issue that we are able to control, and as it's controlled via separate legislation, and if the applicants need a build-over agreement then or other consent from Welsh Water, that's something they'll need to pursue separately. From the site plan, you'll note that separating the extreme of the rear garden from the M4 is a bank of trees that sit outside of the application site. Now, this application is not supported by any arboricultural assessment. However, our internally our tree team have been consulted on this application, and due to the high presence of ash trees located in this bank of trees, they are allegedly, or I'm told they're primarily ash trees that are suffering from ash dieback. It's expected that a number of these trees will need to be removed within the near future. Accordingly, no objection or concern is raised in regards to the position of the outbuilding or the impact upon these trees. The application is supported by a suitable biodiversity enhancement. Therefore, we do have a condition to secure the implementation of that in accordance with the requirements of both local and national planning policies. Then moving on to the public consultation and their comments. Many of these relate to impact upon the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. However, we consider that the development is of a suitable scale as to not result in an overdevelopment of the plot, nor is it of a scale that would prejudice the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers to an unacceptable degree. You'll note from the site photos there is a generous plot, and we consider that the development can be accommodated on site without having any unacceptable adverse impact. Concerns also were raised in respect of traffic and parking, citing that there would be a higher overall demand as a result of the proposed development. When considering the proposal in relation to the adopted parking standards and the proposed use and loss of the garage, we have considered this. As has the Local Highways Authority, no objection or concern is raised in that regard, but we do seek to reinforce that the existing driveway spaces are retained for parking to serve the property. Other concerns then have been raised from disturbance of during the construction phase. This would be expected. Concerns have been raised in relation to overloading of the public sewers. That hasn't been raised as an issue by Welsh Water. Therefore, that's an unsubstantiated claim. There has been some comments received in relation to land ownership due to the nature of the shared private driveway. No development is proposed on the shared access, and therefore we raise no issue or concern in that regard. And there has also been concern raised in relation to the impact on the access road. But again, the nature of the development, we wouldn't consider this to have such a significant impact that we would expect there to be any undue damage to the access roads that would prejudice the condition of that road. So that's been given limited weight in the assessment of the application. A number of other comments have been made, largely with unsubstantiated claims around potential uses or an over-intensification of the use. Concern has been raised that it potentially could be used for other purposes or for a HMO or other again, unsubstantiated claims that are outside the realm of this application and outside of consideration of this application. And again, they are given limited weight in the assessment of this application. So overall, it's a minor householder development seeking to implement single-storey side and rear extensions with a loft conversion and dormer, the reprofiling of the garden, conversion of the garage into additional living space, and the erection of an outbuilding. And the recommendation is to approve subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Mr. Rheoli, would you like to speak?
Good morning, everyone. Just over 20 years ago, I bought a house off Corporation Road, 3-bedroom, semi-detached, for myself, my wife, and one child, one girl. Since then, we had 1 bedroom, my daughter had 1 bedroom, then I had a son, he had the other bedroom. I had another daughter, 2 other girls are sharing 1 bedroom, my son's got his own, we've got our own bedroom. Now, obviously, they've grown up, the 2 girls are arguing, they wanted their own room, we were looking for another house, we couldn't afford one. 2 years ago, I was lucky enough that I sold a business. I had ABC Taxis, which I served Newport for over 20 years. I paid over £500,000 in income tax and told them, wife, you can buy whatever house you want within Newport. My only condition was, be it detached, have a large plot so we can put a garage, a hobby room and a gym area. At the moment, I currently have a garage and a hobby room, and a hobby room, and in there I have a gym, a pool table, and sometimes my friends come along, maybe once every 2 weeks for 2 hours or so, and if we need to use a toilet or they need to use a toilet, at the moment they go into the house, and being Muslims, my wife and my daughters, they wear headscarves. When my friends are there, they have to put them on. If my friends or nobody is there, they casually walk around comfortably. But when they're there, they have to do that. So having a toilet in the back eliminates my friends entering the house. They don't feel comfortable going inside the house. So therefore, they would be comfortable, my missus and the girls, walking around. If my friends are there, that really wouldn't bother them. So we then, my missus was looking for a house on Rightmove for a long time. We couldn't afford one. It was only when we sold the business that I said, look, now you can buy. She found this house on Rightmove. We purchased it from proceeds of crime. And we went in there. There was a 4-bedroom house. Me and my wife got the 1-bedroom, which is en suite. My daughter said she wanted the other bedroom, which was a double. My son said he'd want the other bedroom, which was nearly a double. And my younger daughter looked at the small box room and said, there's no way I'm having that. So they started arguing about who was having what bedroom. We decided then what we would do is we'd convert the loft. My son said, I'll have the loft. And so we thought, OK, we'll bring in a planning officer and see from there. We then contacted planning officer Mr Somas, recently retired Cardiff City Council planning officer, who came in and then he told us what we could do and what we couldn't do, what was good for the neighbours and what was good for us. And he designed and done it with us in a way that it wouldn't affect anyone. And the extension on the side, on the back of the house, he said you can have up to 4 metres if you want. Within PD rights, we decided to go with 3.7 metres. On the side of the house, we currently have a conservatory, and it's just 1 metre extension on that conservatory. That conservatory would be knocked down and incorporated. I wanted a flat roof. The planning officer said, no, it wouldn't look right for the neighbours. Have a pitched roof. Flat roof gives me more light. Pitched roof doesn't give me more light, but it looked better for the neighbours. In the back, obviously, I've just mentioned about the area there. Now, when I first went to view that house, I had a chat with my immediate neighbour, and I was totally honest. I said, have you got any issues with us being Asian? If you have, tell me, I won't buy it. They were lovely. They said, no problem. We bought the house. We explained to them that we're going to be putting planning in, no problem whatsoever. Once the plans went in, all of a sudden, I was looking at it, and a couple of objections came in. It upset me, upset my family. I'm thinking, what is going on here? We're being accused of having a HMO, turning it into a care home, and I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. As more and more objections came in, it became a joke. It was a comedy show within our house, looking at all these objections coming in, and then, what the hell are these people doing? So, what we then decided to do was to alter the plans, because some of the objections said, why are they having a pitched roof? It should be a flat roof, etc. So, therefore, we adjusted our plans. One of the days, I came out of the house, I was on my way out of the estate, and I seen a lady in her front drive. We'd stopped the vehicle, I got out just to say hello. I thought, we've spoken to nobody regarding this. Nobody has spoken to us. So I thought, I can explain to them, it's not going to be a HMO, it's not going to be a care home. This is a house for us. All I wanted to do was just
30 seconds.
When I went to explain, all we were confronted with, you're a liar, you're violent. Please speak to Kate Roberts here in licensing, Alan Lean, public protection. They'll tell you what type of person I am. We're not violent. My son was being accused of being violent. All we want to do is have a family home for us to live in, and basically that was it. But the amount of stuff that we've been subjected to from the neighbours, I'm telling you, I don't even think it's a nice place to live.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. Thank you. Okay. Sorry?
Sorry, Chair. Mr. Chairman.
You're just...
I can't hear what's being said.
Sorry?
I don't know if I cannot hear what is being said.
We just had somebody wanted to speak from one of the residents. We're just clarifying the situation there was saying. If we could just sit tight for 2 minutes, councillors. Right, thank you, everybody. That matter's now closed. We've got no other public speaker. Right, I'll open it up to the members. Okay, Councillor John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just one of the quick points that made as well. It's on about the 7.23, the residential amenity there. It says overlook would be available for the full-length window on the side elevation from the first floor bedroom window towards number 6 Nantmore Close. Would that be that full-length window there? Would that be still obscured? Or if not, how far away from 6 Nantmore Close is that window to their property, please?
Sorry, just to confirm, the query is about the side elevation?
Yeah.
So, just a second, I'll just share my screen again. I'm sorry, which, I'm assuming that you're referring to this window within the upper floor?
Well, it said with the resume, the dormer includes a side window facing the applicant's garden, a roof light,
Yeah.
and 2 rear windows. On the bottom right paragraph, the obscure glazing has been proposed for the rear windows to reduce overlooking will be conditioned. Outlook will still be available from the full-length window to the side elevation.
Yes.
From the first floor bedroom window towards number 6. I got a picture on my screen here. Is that the window? It means looking over to number 6. Is it that one? Is it or?
So that window is looking towards, so that window is on the rear elevation, which is here. So that's showing the current level of overlooking from the existing property towards number 6. What the report is sort of trying to illustrate is that sorry, let me get my elevations. So the rear windows on the dormer would be above that window. So that view would be sort of above those. So those windows, we have a condition suggesting that they be obscurely glazed to not have any additional overlooking towards number 6, which is, sorry, I'm just jumping around. Number 6 is this property here. So the rear elevation is this one, those windows would have views towards this property and their garden space there. So we are suggesting that those windows be obscurely glazed as to ensure that there's no additional high-level windows that would overlook that amenity space. However, the proposed elevations show that outlook would still be available via this window on the side. So in terms of protecting the amenity of existing neighbouring occupiers, we are trying to ensure that there would be no additional high-level windows that would look towards the properties. However, this side window is proposed that would look towards the rear garden, and that would give suitable outlook for future occupiers. So, does that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Also, as well, with the parking and on their drive as well, how many spaces are actually on the drive then for the property? Because I know it's maybe a family of 5, a family of 5 there now. For the number of cars, would there be an adequate number of spaces on their drive?
Yeah, so we, obviously the driveway is existing. Currently, just to go into a bit more detail, so the existing garage doesn't meet the requirements for them to be counted as parking spaces. So in that assessment, we don't consider there to be those to result in a loss. So what we're seeking to do instead is to ensure that the existing driveway spaces are maintained so that there would be no additional loss to the parking provision on site. So our parking standards would be it's 1 space per bedroom to a maximum of 3. So we would never seek, if it was an 8-bedroom house, we wouldn't seek more than 3 spaces on the basis of it being a single dwelling. In accordance with the parking standards. So on that basis, we don't consider that the loss of the garage, or is it loss of the garage, the conversion of the garage results in a loss to the overall parking provision on site, and therefore we're just seeking to maintain that the driveway spaces are kept for parking of vehicles.
Sorry, sir. With the 3 outbuildings at the back on the back of the garden, they don't look, they'll not be overlooked by nothing at all whatsoever.
So if you note this plan, the outbuilding is proposed to run parallel with the rear boundary. Obviously, you've got the bank of trees to the rear, and you'll note ultimately you've got outbuildings located along the rear boundary with the other properties. Again, the one thing to note here is that permitted development rights have not been removed for this site in relation to outbuildings. So outbuildings, extensions, alterations to the roof can all be undertaken without the need for planning permission. So the garage conversion was controlled via condition, and also the reprofiling of the garden. We are considering that as an engineering operation, and that requires planning consent. The other elements here, we haven't considered them, whether or not they accord with the requirements of the permitted development order, because this application is not seeking confirmation of them being lawful. However, we are giving weight to the fact that certain elements can be done without the need for planning consent in this case.
Sorry. And say the 3 outbuildings can be built within the development rights to the 3 metre by 3 metres, is it?
If they accord with the basically, I don't know whether these accord with the requirements of the permitted development order, because we haven't made the assessment on that basis. We've looked at this on, we consider them to be appropriately sited, of an appropriate scale and design, and to not have an unacceptable impact upon the living conditions of neighbours. But it would be possible for outbuildings to be constructed within this plot if they accord with the provision of the order without the express consent of the local planning authority.
I don't have any more speakers. No? Okay. Oh, dear. Councillor Watkins, I knew you couldn't wait.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions I'd like to ask. How many bedrooms are we talking about, Mr. Flood?
Bear with me a second, I'll just reshare my screen with the proposed layout.
Is that sufficient parking spaces for that amount of bedrooms?
Yes, we consider that it is a suitable amount of parking provision for the property. Give me a second. So what you will have is you're going to have, this is the proposed first floor plan. So let me just enlarge this. Sorry. So you'll have 4 bedrooms on the first floor, and then an additional bedroom, so it's 5 in total.
So a 5-bedroom property would only require 3 parking spaces, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that is sufficient on that driveway for the 3 parking spaces?
Yes, and like you said, the existing garage, the internal dimensions don't meet the requirements of the current adopted standards, so we cannot consider those as a loss. But yes, we consider that the current parking provision is suitable. Again, the other point to note is that the property has 4 bedrooms as existing. The proposal results in the addition of 1 bedroom on the within the converted loft. So, you know, you've got a net increase of one bedroom on the site. That does not need planning consent to be implemented. They can convert this loft without the express consent of the local planning authority. And like you say, the garage is restricted via condition. However, those spaces aren't suitable to be counted as parking spaces, and therefore we cannot consider them as a loss. So on that respect, we do not consider there to be any adverse impact in respect of parking provision, nor do the local highways authority.
I understand that. What I'm concerned about, we got 5 bedrooms and we require 3 parking spaces. If that 3 parking spaces are available on the front, I've got no problem with that. The other thing is the windows in the dormer, you say, are going to be obscured glass?
On the rear elevation, so the one that's shown currently, we have a condition attached for those to be fitted with obscure glazing. If I don't know whether it's clear from this image that's being shared, but there is a annotation on the proposed plan. So the applicants are proposing for those to be obscurely glazed also. So it's not, you know, just us. We are attaching a condition that it would be that they would be fitted with obscure glazing and maintained as such. But yes, so these windows on the rear of the proposed dormer are proposed to be fitted with obscure glazing, whereas the side window within the gable end would not be obscurely glazed.
Right. I'm concerned with the obscured glazing ones. Are those windows non-opening?
So let me just double check the condition a second. Sorry.
I don't see any point in having obscured glazing and then all of a sudden that the windows are open. So there's still an overlooking.
So the condition requires for them to be non-opening between below 1.7 metres, which is again the sort of standard for the implementation of windows of that nature.
Okay.
Right, thank you, Councillor.
I got 2 other queries in regards to that, Chair, and that is construction times. Is it possible to put a condition on no construction on a Sunday?
I don't.
Residential area.
So the construction hours of operation for construction are controlled via separate legislation that sits with environmental health. Therefore, we don't consider that it would be necessary or reasonable or meet the tests within the condition circular to attach a condition of that nature, given the minor scale of the development.
I wouldn't call that a minor scale of the development. In fact, I would go as much as to say it's overdeveloped.
Well, you know, what I would say is the majority of these works, or a large amount of works on site that is being proposed, can be done without the express consent of the local planning authority. That is a realistic and quite significant fallback position. You know, whilst there are various elements to this, these are still extensions to a residential property. Therefore, I would suggest that they are very minor in scale.
Okay, one further thing. You mentioned about the ash trees at the back. Who is going to be responsible for removing those, and what access, or if it's Newport City Council or another developer, what access have they got to be able to remove them?
So those trees sit outside of the application site. They're part of the M4 highway verge. Therefore, I would assume that that would be the responsible of Welsh Government Highways Authority. and should they need to remove them, they will have access via the motorway and motorway verges, but there would be no requirement for the applicant to provide access via their private land, nor would I imagine that's the most convenient or opportune mechanism for those to be worked on or removed, as and when they, will need to be.
So it's in the ownership of Welsh Government and not NCC?
I don't know.
That's what I was trying to attain.
Yeah, I don't know who owns that land, but it's part of the M4 highway verge.
Yeah, okay. That's lovely. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Most of my questions, to be honest, in the specifics of the planning, they were answered either in the report or in the verbal report that was given, so thanks for that. I just want to clarify something to do with the wording in the report, to be honest. There's a couple of things that cropped up in a number of different places to do with the planning requirements. You might have actually answered this with Councillor Jordan's questions, but I couldn't quite hear what you were saying, so forgive me if you've already answered this. But the report talks about the dormer not needing planning permission and the outbuildings being allowed under permitted development. And that's mentioned a number of times during in the report. Can I just clarify, even if we were minded to refuse planning for this, that because of what I've just said, this development could still go ahead anyway, and there's not really a lot we can do about it? Am I right in making that assumption from those statements? So,
in this scenario, because planning consent has been sought, we have not assessed this on the basis of whether it is permitted development, whether it meets the requirements of the general permitted development order or not. We've considered it on the merits of the scheme. However, we have had due regard to the fact that permitted development rights are intact here. So you'll note that the applicant in their a sort of statement addressing the committee referenced the scale of the rear extension being below that of what could be constructed without the express consent of the local planning authority. So what I would say here is that whilst we haven't explicitly sort of gone through the requirements of the order, because a lawful development certificate isn't being sought, this is an application for planning consent. What I would say is that a single-storey side and rear extension can be built without the need for planning permission. Outbuildings can be constructed within the rear garden area without planning consent. Alterations to the roof, including the dormer, could be constructed without the need for planning consent. So there are a number of elements or the majority of the elements of this scheme can be constructed or can be undertaken without the express consent of the local planning authority. Whether or not it's to the same extent as what's being proposed, I don't know, because we haven't looked at that. We've looked at whether we think this is an acceptable and an appropriate scheme. But like you said, that roof can be converted and a dormer can be constructed without the need for planning consent. A single-storey side and rear extension can be constructed without the need for planning consent, and outbuildings can be erected within that plot without the need for planning consent. The reprofiling of the garden we consider to be an engineering operation requiring consent, and the conversion of the garage is restricted via a condition attached to the original planning consent for the property. That's why consent is required in that regard. But yes, there's quite a lot that can be done here, irrespective of the outcome of a planning consent.
Answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, quite a bit to unpack there. I just want to clarify, really, because obviously there were quite a few objections from residents and neighbours, and to be fair, most of those objections have been answered in the report, as I said. And I must admit, even some of the objections myself, I did think to myself, it's difficult to refuse planning permission based on what might happen in the future, or try to guess what plans that people might put forward later on. Yeah, we can only deal in here and now and the facts we're presented with. But can I just ask one more question on that? Would you think it's a sort of fair assessment to say that if we did refuse and it went to appeal, we would almost certainly lose that appeal? That's my sort of translation of what you said.
Well, what I would say is that we consider this to be acceptable. So the scale of the proposals we do not consider to be of an unacceptable level or nature, or for the impact to have any unacceptable impact that cannot be controlled by a condition. So my recommendation is that this is acceptable and it should be approved subject to conditions. If it went to appeal, that would be a purely speculative claim, but I would imagine that the inspector would have a view of the officer's report recommending that permission was granted subject to conditions and that due regard had been given to the reasonable and legitimate fallback position of what could be achieved through permitted development. And my informal view is that it would be granted. Again, I don't see any reason for consent to be withheld because any impacts can appropriately be mitigated or managed via condition.
Okay, thanks. That's made things a lot clearer. Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins, want to speak again?
Thank you, Chair. I see, Chair, that the officer was talking about permitted development and what have you, but there is a percentage of the footprint of the property that you're only allowed to go so far with permitted development, not different places. So I'm wondering what that relates to in regards to the percentage of the footprint of the permitted development. You know, the development is 100%, so are you allowed to go 25% or a further 100%, providing they're different permitted development?
Okay, that's fine. So essentially, like you said earlier, we haven't made an assessment here based on whether this is permitted development or not. We have assessed this on the merits of the scheme. However, if we are to break it down into what can be achieved through permitted development, you can't develop over 50% of the overall plot. As we've already seen, this is a large plot with plenty of space. The proposal does not come close to that. The rear extension does not project beyond 4 metres. The side extension does not project beyond 50% of the width of the overall dwelling. And I don't have the exact, in my notes I don't have the outbuilding requirements. Like I said, we haven't assessed them on the basis of whether this is permitted development or not. We've just given significant weight to the fact that these things can occur, whether it's in this form or another, without the need for planning consent. Therefore, but irrespective of that, these aren't huge extensions, these aren't huge developments. It's, there are various elements proposed, but this isn't, this is householder development of a minor, small scale, and we consider that the proposal is visually acceptable, doesn't have an adverse impact upon the character and appearance of the area, doesn't have an adverse impact upon the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers, and therefore we consider it to be acceptable, and that's why it's recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Adam. If members would like a refresher course on what is permitted and not permitted development, perhaps we could arrange that. That could expedite the meetings. Okay. Right. Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see any reason for this to be rejected, so I think it should be granted with conditions.
Thank you. We'll move to the vote now, if that's okay. All those in favour? Sorry.
Chair.
Yes, sorry, could somebody move the recommendation of Councillor Harvey to approve the, yes? Yes, Councillor. Sorry?
Will was going to speak, then he did.
Oh, Councillor Rheoli, you propose that as well?
Yes, Chair. The only thing I would say before I make my mind up which way to vote is that I wasn't swayed by the applicant's argument of religious practice in any shape or way in this planning application, and I hope the planning applications are never going to go down on individual practices. However, I am willing to follow the officer's advice on this occasion. I just wanted to note that reason, and that might be helpful for future applicants. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that's proposed and seconded?
Yes, I'll second.
Yep. Okay. So, can we have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of officers' recommendations to grant this application? Yeah, that's unanimous. Okay, thank you. That's been granted. Okay, right, moving on to item number 2, the application number 26/0019. It's in the ward of St Julian's and the site is 220 Cynllunio Road, Newport. And we have the presenting officer is Vicky Quinn, Senior Planning Officer, and ward member speaking is Councillor Ymddiheuriadau. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the change of use of a 3-bedroom residential property to a 5-bedroom house in multiple occupation. The proposals include a single-storey rear extension. The application is being reported to committee at the request of local ward councillors. A HMO is a house occupied by people who are usually unrelated and have private bedrooms, but shared facilities such as kitchen, living areas and bathrooms. The property is a mid-terrace dwelling fronting Cynllunio Road. It is situated in an urban residential area which is characterised by rows of residential dwellings. The property is located approximately 200 metres from Cynllunio District Centre, where there are a range of shops and services available. Cynllunio Road is also a bus route. The site scores highly in sustainability terms, being within such close proximity to frequent bus services and close walking distance to local shops and services. The layout would comprise, this is the existing layout, let me get to the proposed. The layout would comprise 2 bedrooms at ground floor, together with a communal living area, 3 further bedrooms at first floor. All of the bedrooms would benefit from ensuite bathrooms. The property has a small forecourt to the front and an enclosed rear garden. The property is currently a house and will remain a house. In this case, 5 tenants are proposed. As a 3-bedroom dwelling, we can typically expect 3 or 4 occupants, albeit these will normally be related. In a HMO, like a dwelling, the occupants are expected to live as a household, sharing facilities in the property. However, typically they will occupy with tenancy agreements or contracts per room or occupant. The personal details of occupants themselves is not a planning matter. Neither is a reputation, background, business, etc. of the landlord or owner. The local planning authority will and can only concern itself with land use planning considerations in public interest, and consequently concerns for the identity of future HMO occupiers, the details of rental agreements and charges, the history and personal details of the landlord and other similar matters will not ordinarily inform a planning application assessment and are not considered relevant to this case. Some of these matters are regulated by other parties. The main planning considerations of this application are the potential impacts on the change of use of parking provision and highway safety, as well as the impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area and neighbouring properties, and impact resulting from the proposed extension. The proposal is within the urban area, has a lawful residential use and is located in a sustainable area. These factors accord with the principles set out in Strategic Policy SP1 of the adopted Local Development Plan. Policy H8 of the adopted LDP relates to self-contained accommodation and houses in multiple occupation and says that HMOs will only be permitted if specific criteria are met. The full policy wording is set out within the officer report. The adopted HMO SPG, which must be afforded substantial weight in decision-making, states that clusters of HMOs can alter the composition of a community and detract from local visual amenity. The guidance introduces a threshold above which HMOs are considered to detract from the character of the area. In general, the Council will not support a planning application that would take the number of HMOs considered as a proportion of local housing stock above a specified limit. This site is located within the 10% threshold. When taking a 50-metre radius from the address point of the application site, the full front elevations of 35 properties are caught. And there are no existing registered HMOs within the 50-metre radius. Therefore, if the application were to proceed, the 10% threshold would not be exceeded. Consequently, HMO concentration levels are not grounds to refuse permission in this case. Officers assess proposals for HMOs to ensure that a good standard of amenity would be provided. Where this is not the case, officers will refuse such schemes, and one example of this is a recent application for a 7-bed HMO at Derwin Church Road, also in the St Julian's ward, which did not include suitable outdoor amenity space or waste storage. In this instance, there is a communal living room and kitchen located at ground floor. Access to a rear garden is provided to residents and bike storage provision is proposed and can be controlled by condition. Whilst a small single-storey rear extension is proposed, the external alterations would not encourage the property to stand out or appear different to other residences in the street. The HMO standards state that a single bedroom should be at least 6.51 metres squared. Shared kitchens and living rooms for up to 5 persons should be 7 metres squared and 10 metres squared respectively. All bedrooms and living spaces meet or exceed these requirements. All rooms contain windows providing adequate light and ventilation for occupiers, with access to an adequately sized rear garden, and all of this weighs in its favour. The accommodation would provide a suitable standard of amenity for future occupiers. One point of clarification: in paragraph 7.10 of the officer report, reference is made to 4 bedrooms, and this should read 5. The single-storey rear extension is modest in scale at just over 3 metres in width, 2 metres in length and 3.7 metres in height. No windows or doors are proposed within the extension. It is of a small scale and is not considered to result in an adverse impact in terms of either design, light, neighbouring privacy or amenity. The existing boundary treatment between the application property and the neighbouring property is low. I'll just show you that. This boundary here. And as such, it is recommended that a condition to require details of a 1.8 metre high boundary treatment be included in the interests of neighbouring amenity. In relation to parking and highway matters, the existing dwelling has 3 bedrooms, and this generates a parking demand of 3 spaces calculated using the Council's parking SPG. There is no parking on site. The 5-bedroom HMO would require 1 space per bedroom, a total of 5 spaces and a visitor space, so 6 spaces in total, and therefore results in an increase in parking demand. However, we know that certain factors must be afforded substantial weight when assessing parking impacts, notably whether or not the site is sustainable. In this case, it is. The Council's Highways Officer raises no objection despite the parking survey accompanying the application showing parking in high demand. In relation to cycle parking, this is the same as existing in that anyone with a cycle will need to store it in the back garden thereby wheeling it through the property. This is the existing situation and does not change. Existing parking problems and concerns regarding a worsening of the existing situation and subsequent highway safety matters have been raised as significant concerns within the resident objection and also the local councillor response. Parking was observed by officers at the time of a recent site visit, and whilst it's clearly in high demand due to the presence of off-street parking, due to the absence of any off-street parking provision serving houses in the area, there were on-street spaces within the walking distance of the site. It is appreciated that parking demand will vary depending on the day and time, and reliance on on-street parking may mean that occupiers are unable to park in front of or even near to their homes. However, inspectors have confirmed this is not justification to refuse planning permission, and the availability of on-street parking on neighbouring streets is sufficient. Of particular note is the fact that the local planning authority has tested decisions on HMOs in relation to lack of parking several times in recent years. All have been dismissed at appeal. The key point for inspectors is the sustainability of the location, not the availability of parking. In this instance, the site is located within 200 metres of a district centre. I'll show you that on the slide. So the red indicates the district centre on this slide, and I don't know if you can make out to the top of the slide, there's a bullseye just around where my cursor is, and that's the application property. Reference is made by officers within the report relating to an appeal decision at 23 Arundel Road. The proposal was for the change of use of the property from a 3-bed dwelling to a 5-bed HMO, with the sole reason for a refusal relating to lack of parking. Similarly, the application was supported by a parking survey that showed that a high demand for parking in the area was with an overall parking stress of 96%, which equates to 6 free parking spaces out of a possible 167 within the area. And the high demand meaning that people have to park further away from their homes. However, the inspector noted that this is not unusual in a dense urban location of terrace streets, where car ownership has increased over time to render on-street parking a matter of some inconvenience owing to a competition, and that such inconvenience may encourage some motorists to use public transport, cycle or to walk, as advocated by Planning Policy Wales. The inspector gave considerable weight to the sustainability of the development in the appeal case, noting that this type of accommodation is likely to be attractive to those without a car, and the rigid application of parking standards is not appropriate in the circumstances of this case. The inspector did not consider that the proposal would give rise to significant concerns regarding highway or pedestrian safety. The issues raised primarily relate to matters of convenience, which are not sufficient to warrant refusal of the proposal. This recent decision for a similar proposal relating to a property located in a sustainable location is a material consideration and should be afforded significant weight in the decision-making process. There has been no change in policy or supplementary planning guidance in the intervening period. In terms of waste storage, the property has a front forecourt, and like neighbouring properties, waste is stored here. This is the way in which waste would be stored as a dwelling, and the use as a HMO would not stand out in this respect. It should be noted that waste officers have previously confirmed a 180-litre bin for HMOs of 5 beds or more, rather than the 120-litre bin stated in paragraph 5.3 of the report. The change of use would not result in an exceedance of the threshold set out in the Council's guidance, and it is not considered that the proposals would result in a demonstrable impact to the character of the area. The proposals would potentially increase demand for parking when assessed against the Council's adopted parking SPG, but this parking can be accommodated safely on street. Furthermore, the site is located within a sustainable location within close proximity to shops and services with good transport links. As such, it is not considered that the proposals would result in an adverse impact to highway safety and neighbouring amenity. It is recommended to members that the application is granted subject to the stated conditions.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Okay, welcome back, Councillor Hooray.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for agreeing to see me this morning. Members of the committee will be familiar with the arguments that I will put forward, but they need to be restated for this and such applications in St Julian's Ward. 220 Cullion Road, the change of use from a 3-bedroom dwelling into a 5-bedroom HMO is neither wanted nor desirable. There are many objections and no support from any residents for this application. This is the 3rd time I've visited you for an HMO between 220 Cullion Road and the district shops. It's a general principle of democracy that we do things with people rather than, in this case, to them. This is not wanted. The purpose of this application, I would suggest, is purely a money-making scheme and no benefits whatsoever to the community. Houses that are rented nearby attract a rent of some £250 per month. A room in an HMO is available for at least £600 a month. How much better for the developer if he or she can get a return of £3,000 per month. There are 14 HMOs on Cullion Road. If we include the 3 in close proximity, with many more in roads leading off them. There are a number of properties in the area that are being used at HMOs but do not come under the regulations, as they were probably established before these constraints were put in place. The objectors cite traffic congestion, the lack of parking, and making one of the main arterial routes of the city effectively a one-way street. I know you've heard all these objections before, even though they're still just as relevant in this case. Even your officers are choosing to ignore or at best modify the planning guidelines in this case, as no one is suggesting there's any parking space in the vicinity. When I last visited you in summing up, one of your officers suggested there was a modal shift from cars to buses. In this part of the city, that's definitely not the case, as within a few days of my last visit, one of the buses was withdrawn due to lack of passengers. People like cars, I'm afraid. And despite all the protests about greening, it's actually not happening and not likely to in the foreseeable future. The houses in this area were built as family homes, some of them converted into flats in recent years, which seems to have been accepted by adjacent neighbours. The proposal now to further subdivide them again is totally unacceptable. If it had some merit, these buildings were to produce additional living spaces. Their original intention was a 2 to 2.5 family of occupation to occupy them with, of course, some larger family. Moving to single people into these areas does not do anything for social cohesion. This is often ignored. Social cohesion seems to be irrelevant in the minds of your planning officers. When the planning committee has approved previous applications, each has been treated as an individual with no consideration given to the wider community. The regional shopping centre has totally changed the retail offering. Gone the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers and the utility shops that supported family households being replaced by cafes and fast food outlets. Is this really what we want for our society? The schools that once supported the local population have changed in terms of catchment, with children being drawn from all over the city. the school run creating further problems as there is a diminishing number of local children. And probably for the first time this year, Glanhusk has 7 spare places in the reception class. This will only get worse as when HMOs are allowed to multiply, children don't multiply as such. You have heard the arguments put forward previously about additional litter and general antisocial behaviour. This always seems to have been ignored until such actions can be proven. If you pass this today, that will be the end of planning officers' roles, and it will be passed on to regulating officers to try and control the problems caused. One of the greater blights on our city today is fly tipping and littering. HMOs, such as the one proposed today, are acknowledged as being part of the problem. The supplementary planning guidance you are working to, I believe, is out of date and desperately in need of amendment. Hence, I would ask you to look at the whole area and treat it as one cohesive community, which it was designed for, not the piecemeal approach that has been taken today. We are not opposed to well-designed and regulated homes for single people, and the development on Crawford Street, which is nearing completion, is an excellent example of what we should be aiming for. I respectfully ask you to reject the application for the conversion of 220 Killian Road into an HMO, as it is unwanted and a further blight on the designated family area. The Planning Inspector Wales will be cited as the reason you can't reject this application. I would ask you before you vote to consider what you want for Newport and search your consciences. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, for your passionate speech there on behalf of your members. Right. Okay, then we'll open to members, please. Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a quick point on section point 715. It says the application is accompanied by the parking survey and the Kensal Highway advises while it was a parking survey, it does not follow the Lambeth methodology. Why didn't they follow the Lambeth methodology? Is it because they know that the parking is horrendous on that area? And also it did say that the locations are not identified and no dates and time stamped on it as well. So how come they haven't followed the Lambeth methodology on this one?
Not entirely sure, to be honest. Our SPG advocates the Lambeth methodology, but it doesn't state that it has to be done in accordance with that, and we can give weight to a parking survey which is done other than in accordance with that methodology. We fully acknowledge the shortcomings in the parking survey, and so does the Council's Highways officer, but despite that, what is repeatedly coming from appeal decisions is that it's not the presence of the availability of on-street parking provision in the area that is key. It's the location of the sustainable nature of the location. And as I said, in this instance, it is within close proximity to the district centre. We are not successful at appeal with HMOs when it comes to parking. So fully acknowledge that parking is in very high demand in the area. Albeit at the time of several site visits that I undertook, I was able to park within a short walking distance. So there is availability, it appears, a bit further afield from properties, albeit that will be of an inconvenience to residents, which we appreciate, but we conclude that that is not reason to refuse the application.
Also, I did notice that the police have actually commented on this as well for a change, you know, that they don't normally look at the HMOs normally with this as well, which I found which was a bit alarming on some of the sections in Maindy and the wards and what percentage of the crimes were along the area. Also as well, I noticed what amenity space or outside amenity space have they got there in the back garden, because they're using some of that space and to build an extension at the back. Is that enough room for amenity space for the back of the property as well?
I'll share my screen again to show you some photos and the plans. So if I show you on plan form first, the size of the rear garden. So it's not the best of plan because of the scale of it. You can't see it brilliantly. It's not the biggest of gardens, but it is typical of properties in this area, and you can see it's the same size as the neighbouring gardens. If I show you a photo of the rear garden. So, yeah, you can get a feel for the size of the rear garden from this photo, and what I would stress is this very small scale of the extension. If I tell you again the proportions of it, and here's one looking back at the rear elevation of the property. Bear with me while I find dimensions. So 3 metres in width and just 2 metres in length. So it's roughly going to come out to whereabouts that those wooden posts are. So it's a very small scale extension and won't take up an awful lot of what is already a reasonably sized garden. So in answer to your question, yes, we consider that it will still provide a decent size of amenity space despite the proposed extension.
And I must say, for a HMO like this, I did notice they've all got ensuite bathrooms, which is a good thing, which is a very good thing for a HMO. Have they actually got a communal bathroom as well, or no?
No, they haven't. Just the ensuite bathrooms.
I was just saying, if they've had family and friends over or something, they need to entertain people. Where are they going to stay? I mean, all these other people who actually live there have actually got to go to their own rooms. So I was just thinking about a bit of amenities for the people using toilets.
Sorry, was that a question?
It was a comment, actually, which was a good one, with the HMO without en-suites on them.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jason. Councillor Watkins, do you have your hand up?
No, the question's been answered, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perkins.
You said it's a very small extension, 3 by 2, but on your plan it shows that that's the living room space, and it shows no area on there for eating. So is that room in the kitchen for them to actually sit down and eat, or are they? And it also says no windows in the extension. So what light is there going to be in the lounge area?
I'll share my screen again, show you the layout. So the extension will be, so if I should go back to the existing layout, so you've got a kitchen and downstairs toilet currently, and then the proposed ground floor layout will be a kitchen and communal living area. And although the extension itself won't have any windows or doors, that is an open plan kitchen living area, and there will be a window and a door that will provide light into it.
But will that be enough light into a further 3 by 2 on that back end with no windows in it?
So this is the proposed side elevation. So as well as light coming from the door and the window. There'll be light coming from the door and the window. And I think it's important to remember that that is the current arrangement for that side of elevation and the scale of the extension. So we're not proposing a huge extension, and consequently I think the light that will be coming from the window and the door will be sufficient.
But at the minute, that existing bit on the back of them is a downstairs toilet, which doesn't need light in the same way as a living room does.
I can only reiterate that I think that the light that will be coming into that space from both the door and the window is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the communal kitchen, I noticed there's no seating area there to have food. So does that mean that they are preparing food, cooking food there, and then taking it back to their own rooms?
So, I mean, obviously this floor plan shows a kitchen and a seating area.
That's the seating area.
Yeah, as in the kitchen area will obviously be necessary for residents to prepare their meals. With regards to the seating area, I mean, that's indicative, so whether they have a seating area there or they might have a table there will be entirely up to them. But for the purposes of the plan, it's indicative only.
But there is sufficient space there for that, if required?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a question. When we have anything come from planning, we stipulate that there has to be adequate parking space. Why should we let this lapse for an HMO? Because there's no adequate parking space there.
Every application on its own merits. We fully acknowledge that there isn't sufficient parking in this instance, but we must take account of sustainability. In this instance, we're not far from a district centre, it's on a bus route. Those are material considerations. We've tried and tested HMOs at appeal, and we've been entirely unsuccessful in terms of parking. That is a material consideration, and it's on that basis that the officer recommendation is made.
Thank you. Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just another quick point. So when police have consulted and requested conditions in related to matters covered by mental health, what conditions are that they've actually put onto this application, then, please?
Gwent Police will often request conditions which are not necessarily within the remit of planning and may be covered by other legislative bodies such as building control. In this instance, the recommendations that were made relating to secured by design recommendations, no conditions were attached in this instance. However, it may be appropriate to attach informatives rather than conditions in this instance.
It was just flagged up, you know, because if they got issues or concerns, you know, they've put conditions. It was just like, you know, what they really were.
The nature of the conditions that they request tend to be secured by design, so such as fencing, locks, so things of that nature, and those aspects will often be covered by, for example, licensing.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. If there's no further questions, should we move to the officer's recommendations to grant this application? Should we have a show of hands, please? All those in favour? Could somebody propose? Yes, Councillor Watkins proposed. Seconder, Councillor Reynolds. So we have a show of hands. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4. All those against? 1, 2, 3. And there's no abstentions, nothing else, so that's carried. Thank you. Okay. That's that closes this morning's meeting. Thank you all very much for turning up. Also, if you'd like any refresher courses on what was discussed here earlier in the previous application, speak to officers and arrange something. Okay.